Parler sues Amazon. Mozilla calls for more than deplatforming, and the response and rollout of the vaccine has been bungled. All this and more today on Breaking on the Daily. Now, let's begin with that Amazon Parler lawsuit then. So, Parler sued Amazon just last night. It's a continuation of the story from yesterday, what I was ranting about. So, this is something that most people expected to see as, well, Amazon was doing some kind of shady stuff in relation to what happened with Parler and taking down their web service. But this lawsuit is quite interesting, and Amazon has already responded to it, of course calling it completely meritless, essentially, and saying, oh, we didn't do anything, because, of course, that's what they're going to say. But I don't think that their response is quite effective, because it ignores a lot of what Parler says. To give you a rundown on their response, they said that Parler is essentially unable to moderate or police their own website for acts of violence. However, and references the evidence that they brought in a call that was mentioned in the lawsuit itself by Parler, that, oh, we have, like 98 examples or whatever. It was around 100 if I remember correctly. But the thing is that Parler already responded to that within the lawsuit. Because within the lawsuit, Parler said that during that call, and when they were given these screenshots, Parler looked at them and said, we already took these off. So, yeah, their argument that Parler can't police their website and that's why they removed them is debunked. And they're using this as a response to the lawsuit from Parler. It's debunked by Parler in the lawsuit. And it's one of their main points, is that this call happens. They say, well, we've already policed this stuff, and then essentially as time went on, the Amazon reps got wind that the call was being recorded, and then they were like, okay, we're gonna leave, and we'll just call you back later, and then it just never happened. They took away their services. Yeah, this is pretty clearly not okay. I mean, there are many problems with what Amazon did here, and not just antitrust problems. They also have things like breach of contract, which Parler alleges, and it will be interesting to see where this lawsuit goes. A lot of people are very pessimistic about this lawsuit. I'm not quite so. Of course, yeah, the justice system is a mess. It's been a mess for years, but this isn't something that I would say is directly connected to the election, and is something that I think has more of a chance of actually getting through, especially since a lot of the claims from Parler seem to be well thought out, and they seem to be not really responded to properly from Amazon. You can always kind of tell who's winning the argument in a lawsuit depending on how, each side is speaking. Because the side that's losing will generally be kind of manic and will be making claims that were already talked about by the other guy and were thoroughly debunked. And this Amazon response is actually a good example of such, because they specifically bring up something that Parler was talking about as being something that was wrong. It is quite hilarious, actually. And Parler even mentions that they brought this up to Amazon. That they told Amazon, hey, yeah, we already policed all those things. We got rid of them. We got rid of them before you even mentioned them to us. We already knew. They don't exist on Parler. But of course they're talking about that, and this is all surrounding similar things. So there was a claim of a hack yesterday. So as far as I understand, it wasn't actually a hack. It was just public materials being archived. Essentially, some person was downloading a bunch of data from Parler, publicly available data, as in pretty much just the posts and any available information on someone's Parler page. That's all that was happening. Is that this person just took down the data from Parler, publicly available data. It's not actually a hack. This person does not have any access to private materials that weren't literally already publicly released. Nothing that wasn't publicly released already was gained through this hack. It wasn't even a hack. It was just archiving. It's the equivalent if I go onto Twitter and then I go over to archive.is or archive.vn, archive today. Good website, use it. I suggest you do. And then I archive it. I do that for this show every day. I do essentially what this person did every single day for this show. Every single day. Because all of my links are archived in the description. It's just silly. But that's kind of off in the weeds. I'm just, this lawsuit, I kind of want to wait to see where it goes. I'm not going to really say either way. I'm just going to say I'm not as cynical about it as everyone else. Anyway, on to our next story. And this is an interesting one because Bitcoin has dropped 20%. And has settled at 32K around there. I kind of still expect it to drop, though. It's still kind of above where I'd expect it to be at this point. It's still kind of above its natural logarithmic. I'm just going to give up on pronouncing that word. It's up above its normal curve, what it's naturally at. I think it's still above there. And I do expect it to drop still. But this shouldn't be surprising. I mean, people have complained about Bitcoin as a currency and as an investment in a lot of ways by saying, oh, well, it's so unstable, oh, it crashes all the time. But you have to understand what makes it crash all the time. And it has nothing to do with the inherent value of Bitcoin as a currency or of its merits or anything of the sort. What it has to do is that Bitcoin is very susceptible to hype. And the reason it's very susceptible to hype is because it's very new. Even though it's more than 10 years old at this point, in the realm of currency, it's really, really, really young. I mean, we're talking about the idea of a paper currency is a few hundred years old, if not even more. Coins are even older than that, and gold as a currency has been a thing for millennia. For such a long time, gold has been a currency that has been used by many cultures and civilizations, and other coins and such like that. Currencies is a very old idea. So even something that is, around 15 or so years old, like Bitcoin is still very young and still very new as a currency, especially within the public consciousness, because it didn't really become popular and become a major investment for a lot of mainstream people until around 2015. Up until that point, it was mostly in the background, with some people looking at it as the future of currency, and other people looking at it essentially as nothing. And that's why it's so susceptible to hype. So when Bitcoin starts rising and you start seeing more historic numbers and you start seeing it closer around to where it's getting to its high, you'll see a lot of news articles, a lot of financial papers and such like that start talking about how, oh man, it's so close to this historic high, buy in now. And of course, people being stupid and not understanding you buy low and sell high, they'll buy into it. They'll buy into it at its peak because that makes sense, apparently, to them. I mean, it doesn't really make sense, but they do it. That's just kind of something you have to roll with because that's how that's really going to work. I mean, that's just how Bitcoin is. Bitcoin, it's how Bitcoin is. It's how people work more. It doesn't really have anything to do, Bitcoin dropping like it has over and over again has nothing really to do with how Bitcoin works. It has to do with how people work. People really, really get hyped on cryptocurrency for a few months. They see it rise, and then once they see it fall at all, they'll start panic selling, trying to get out of it, and then trying to, preserve their potential profits. Of course, this is exactly the wrong way to invest. So what you should be doing is investing right now is something I wouldn't say is very well advised. I would consider that you should wait still for it to see where it really bottoms out, because it's been at 32,000 and it's been at 32,000 for about a day or so, kind of hovering around there. I've seen it vacillate from around 32 to 35, but I do expect it to still drop a little bit more. So I'd say if you're planning on buying into Bitcoin, and after the drop, it's going to be a very good idea to do so. To be clear here, I notice I haven't actually said this. This isn't financial advice, all right? I'm just proffering my opinion on Bitcoin. I'm not giving you financial advice. It's more what I'm thinking at the time. And it's obviously not expert advice at all. I don't claim to be credentialed in this area or whatever. You know, you know the drill. You know, it's just not how that works. But I'm personally not going to be buying into more Bitcoin until I think it's going to drop in a bit more. Yeah, you know, and if you're basic investment, you know, basic investment like ideas is you have to wait until it's at its bottom to buy. You know, it's pretty basic, buy low, sell high philosophy on that. Yeah, but on to our next story, and this is kind of a story where I differ slightly from some of what has been said of this story, and it's interesting because the headline's egregious. The headline's terrible. So the Mozilla blog, and for those who don't know, and I don't know how you wouldn't know, but Mozilla is the Mozilla group are the people who do Firefox, you know, the browser, the alternative to Chrome, and also inferior to Brave. And I think that should be clear at this point. I mean, if you're using Firefox, I would say stop, because some of the things that they suggest in this article are really, really terrible. But I will say, some of what they suggest is not bad. Okay, let's preface this by saying their whole excuse and their whole reasoning before all of this is really terrible. Essentially, they start with, oh, insurrection, oh, Donald Trump, you know, orange man bad, whatever, white supremacy. And then they say, and that's all just to get to what they want to actually specifically be done, because they actually give some specific examples of what they want to be done. And some of these things are not terrible. So, to start from there, the additional precise and specific actions must also be taken. All right, so this is how they're going to introduce what specifically they want to happen. All right, reveal who is paying for advertisements, how much they are paying, and who is being targeted. Now, this is not a bad idea. And transparency, in a general sense, is always a kind of thing I like. You know, I like election transparency, transparency with regard to, you know, advertising, transparency with regard to business practices. I like transparency, so this isn't a bad idea. I wouldn't say legislate that necessarily, but, you know, as a sort of social norm, you know, something that we impose, you know, informally on social media platforms and people who advertise in that. Not a bad idea. Their second thing, commit to meaningful transparency of platform algorithms so we know how and what content is being amplified, to whom, and the associated impact. All right, that's something I'm okay with as well. I have been an advocate for opening up platform algorithms, allowing people to actually see what's going on for a long time. My biggest problem with YouTube and a lot of social media platforms is the fact that their algorithms are so opaque and that they change on such a regular basis. YouTube, beyond just what their political algorithms are, and we have problems with their political algorithm, of course, and that is one of the most egregious areas of where they're explicitly demoting specific actions, and they're making it clear what exactly they don't like, that being right-wing thought. The YouTube algorithm has problems in other areas as well. No matter what part of YouTube you're on, you'll see people complaining about the YouTube algorithm and how it changes and how it's completely opaque and doesn't make any sense. You're going to see that whether you're going to a gaming YouTube channel, or a beauty YouTube channel, or a drama YouTube channel. No matter what you're doing, no matter where you are, you're going to see that sort of thing being complained about, because the YouTube algorithm is simply terrible. And that's not to say that necessarily it is that the algorithm itself is inherently awful, more that YouTube and how they handle their algorithm is really, really bad, because they change it, and they change it in small ways all the time. It's like a bi-monthly basis that suddenly something will just change, and you'll see your numbers completely change, either for the better or for the worse, and you'll have no idea why that's the case. And you'll put out videos that were 2 weeks ago being favored by the algorithm, which are suddenly unfavored by the algorithm. And there's no transparency or talking about this with regard to YouTube. And yeah, a lot of the other social media platforms have a problem with this, but I think YouTube is actually one of the most egregious and one of the most clear examples of such. Now, those two were good. Those two, I would say, are actually quite good assertions, quite good things to be, had. I would actually quite like to have them. Now, we move on to the bad parts. These next two. Turn on by default the tools to amplify factual voices over disinformation. And 2, work with independent researchers to facilitate in-depth studies of the platform's impact on people and our societies and what we can do to improve things. Now, the second one's obviously terrible because who decides what the truth is? The idea of arbiters of any particular thing, the ideas of arbiters of truth, is a simply absurd assertion. There is no such thing as an arbiter of truth other than the reality that is around us. We can't take a certain person. We can't just get Joe Schmo over there, or anyone. We can't get Mr. University has 15 doctorates over there and say either of those two are ambassadors of the truth or are arbiters of the truth. And the reason we can't do that is because everyone has the capacity to not only lie, but simply be mistaken. And this sort of truth arbitration, this sort of idea that we can have arbiters of truth is based in something I wouldn't call a lie, but something I would call a severe misunderstanding of human nature. As stated, everyone has the potential to lie or be mistaken. And once you understand that, the idea of an arbiter of truth, the idea of a fact checker, becomes simply absurd. You cannot say to me, and you cannot explain to me, that, oh, this person's the arbiter of truth. Oh, look at the CDC. Everything they say must be absolutely accurate. Because that's not true. It's not true that any person just walking up to me, or what I mean by any person is literally any person who could walk up, no matter how good credentialed they are, or how little credentialed they are. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who comes up to me. They have equal potentials to lie or be inaccurate. And now, maybe I shouldn't say equal. They do have slightly different potentials. It's someone who's extremely credentialed in something like, a hard science like a physics or something is much more likely to be accurate when it comes to, physics than someone who knows nothing about physics, obviously. But that potential is not 100%, obviously. It never eliminates that potential because you never eliminate the fact that you are human. And I don't know why this sort of thing has to be explained, but apparently it does. I just hate this sort of thing. And the second one is, frankly, not much better, though it's designed to be more, more palatable to a lot of people, and a lot of people would consider this to be more palatable. This sort of study will never be used to be accurate, and will never be used, and will never be created to simply show the results. Because here's the thing about all of these sorts of studies: this effort would be no different than, for those of you who remember, back a few years ago, the Alternative Influence Network. If you remember that study, it was completely nonsensical. It was completely. It was saying things like, oh, Philip DeFranco is going to turn people into an alt-right Nazi, and things like that. It would be very similar to that. And the reason is that a lot of these sorts of studies that are planned on creating or justifying policy are not designed to be accurate, but rather to actually to tell people what they want to hear. You see this a lot with governmental studies. And the next story that we have is actually a very good example of this. And that is, we have a CDC study. 59% of new COVID-19 infections transmitted by people with no symptoms. Now, you might be saying, oh, Cal Kidman, you've been saying for months that, asymptomatic spread is almost non-existent or hardly a thing. What do you say to this study? And of course, if I ever get into any internet arguments over the next few weeks, I'm sure to have this study thrown in my face. Here's the thing. And here's the advantage I have as a person who has a literacy higher than the third grade. I read the study. And you see, once you read the study, you discover it's a model. Now, anyone who's been watching my channel for any length of time knows I hate models. Because models, for those who don't know, are not science. It is pseudoscientific nonsense to say, oh, we created this model, we put some data that we assumed was the case, and we assumed certain factors would affect this data, and we put it through this equation, and then we came up with this data. Man, this must be real. No. You might as well, to bring us back to some things I've said many times in the past, you might as well open up something like Doom Eternal and do your scientific study there for all of the accuracy that it's worth. And in this case, it's completely ridiculous because this study did not find that 59% of new COVID-19 infections are transmitted by people with no symptoms. No, it assumed that would be the case by assuming that people with no symptoms are 75% as transmissible as people with symptoms. Wow! They literally admit to assuming this in the study. Do you see the problem? This study does not show you anything useful. All it does is attempt to justify policy in a way that is frankly dishonest. It's a disgrace. It is just a disgrace to see this sort of thing happen over and over and over again in the scientific community. It is a disgrace to see people do this. All right, people who spend their careers modeling to justify governmental policy should be ashamed of themselves because they know full well this doesn't have anything to do with reality. They know full well all of this, but of course they're never gonna admit to it. It's simply ridiculous. It annoys me to no end. This study in this story, it annoys me to no end. Let's calm down. All right, this is because the next story is a bit more funny. Because the vaccine response, for those who haven't been following it at all, and on this show it hasn't really been followed up to this point, it's been pretty bungled. It's been a pretty big mess. So, the Trump administration has now directed all states to release all COVID-19 vaccine doses. Because up until this point, for those who haven't been following it, a lot of states have just been throwing away vaccines. I think it was New York threw away like 4 million vaccine doses or something ridiculous. Like a ridiculous amount of vaccines. And the reason is, and I'm going to tell you exactly what the reason is for this. Because the vaccine plan, the vaccine rollout plan, has been based around giving, around something which is quintessentially government healthcare. And that is, they start with the old people. They specifically give out the vaccine to only specific groups of people. Now, for those of you who cannot discover the problem with this, and I would be amazed if you couldn't, supply and demand does not work perfectly like that. It does not happen that you have just enough vaccines to vaccinate the entire population of people you want to vaccinate by that point, and no more or no less. It never works out that way. It will never work out that way because that's not how economies work. That's not how the distribution of materials works. That's just not how that works. The simple and obvious way to do a vaccine rollout is take the vaccine and put it on the open market for like $100 or for how much that the market's going to bear it. That is the obvious way to do it. It will be it is the most effective way to do it. It will get to the most people who actually need it more than any other system. Any other system. And yeah, could you have a certain amount of vaccines labeled as free, essentially for people who are in less effective means? Yeah, sure. But it's worth it to mention that many of the people who actually need the vaccine are on Social Security benefits. It's just, it's infuriating. It's very funny, actually, to see all of these governments completely bungling the response and then claiming, we need more. We need more of this. We need more government health care. That sounds like a good idea. Seeing how they completely, did everything right with this vaccine response. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Huh. Jeez. and to talk about governmental healthcare, so many people will recognize that, oh, yeah, this vaccine response has been completely bungled. This has been a nightmare. We should still do Medicare for all. That still sounds like a good idea. Yeah, let's do socialized medicine. Yeah, and when brought to the awareness that, well, if we do that, then all of this stuff that's happening with the vaccine will happen everywhere else, they'll say, okay, yeah, but we can get rid of the governmental corruption. We can get rid of the governmental bloat while still having governmental healthcare. No. Name me a single time in which that has happened. And this is a funny thing, because many people will advocate for certain things, certain responses to any given scenario. You see this a lot of the time. You know, the economic perpetualists also have this problem, commie good conservatives and those alike. You also have this with the protectionists, where they will advocate for certain things, which have literally never worked once. Literally never been done. And say, yeah, no, we can just do it. You know, like getting rid of governmental corruption. You know, like actually having an antitrust suit that worked and did what it was supposed to do and not made things worse. You know, had an antitrust action that actually functioned. I've never seen a time where antitrust has ever actually worked. It's funny because people glom themselves onto antitrust, and it doesn't work. I've never seen a problem that was solved by antitrust. I've only seen things been exacerbated by antitrust. I've only seen problems been exacerbated by governmental regulation, by nationalization of industry. So it's very funny to me to see people advocate for things like that. And yeah, the same thing goes for Medicare for all and that sort of stuff. Because people are like, oh, we'll get rid of the governmental bloat. You can't. You can't. And once you realize that, it's really, really hard. You know, once you realize that governmental bloat, governmental corruption is never going to go away, it becomes really easy to be a libertarian. It becomes really easy, and it becomes pretty much the only option, in fact, to say, why should the government be doing any of this at all? It's quite funny. It's quite funny, actually, because people who have realized this become libertarians super fast. It's why I am currently a libertarian. Of course, I'm not a capital L libertarian. I'm not someone a part of the Libertarian Party. The Libertarian Party is a joke, by the way. Utter joke. They're hardly even libertarian. You know, after their last candidate, after George Jorgensen, I would say they're not even libertarian at all. I'm libertarian in philosophy, not in political party, just to be clear. Yeah, I think that's where I'm going to leave you today. This has been Breaking on the Daily. I'm Kel Kidman, and I'm out.